I am Emily Carter, 28 years old, and I should have started my story with the image of a radiant bride on her big day. But the truth was far from that. My wedding took place in a small, charming garden filled with warm lights and the laughter of friends, yet there was still an empty space that nothing could fill: the seats of my parents. They were not there. They had chosen another place, another event. While I walked in my white wedding dress beside the man I love, my parents were sitting in the front row of an auditorium, clapping proudly for my younger sister Chloe, 22, their so-called ballet angel. To them, her performance was the important day, while the wedding of their eldest daughter was treated as just another gathering they could easily skip. When the wedding photos were posted on social media, I never expected them to spread so quickly. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues all shared them, adding the inevitable question: why weren't the bride's parents at their daughter's wedding? That was when the storm began. My father, Robert, grew furious, feeling humiliated, and even threatened to divorce my mother. My mother, Karen, fell into a state of crisis, embarrassed yet still trying to defend herself. And Chloe was outraged, claiming I had deliberately used my wedding to disgrace the family. What should have been the beginning of happiness instead became the center of a family storm. So I want to ask you, the ones listening to this story, if your parents missed the most important day of your life just to attend a performance, what would you do? Let me know in the comments, along with where you are watching this story from, so I know I am not alone. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, in an ordinary two-story house with a backyard full of green grass and a wooden swing my dad hung for me when I was 6. In my early years, I still remember vividly how my parents were always by my side. My dad often carried me on his back for walks in the park on weekends, and my mom patiently sat with me as I practiced writing my first letters. I once believed I was the center of their world, at least until my younger sister Chloe was born. From that moment, everything changed. The house that had once echoed with little stories about my school life became filled with the sounds of ballet music and Chloe's dancing steps. At first, I didn't notice the shift, but the older I got, the clearer it became. I remember the first time I competed in a public speaking contest in high school. I won second place, an achievement my teachers called impressive. I rushed home excited to tell my mom. But instead of truly listening, she just gave me a half-hearted smile and said, "Good job, I'm proud of you. But don't forget to help me get Chloe ready for her performance tomorrow." The next morning, the whole family went to watch Chloe perform in a crowded auditorium, while my certificate sat forgotten on the dining table, its edges curling under the afternoon sundae. When I graduated high school, wearing my navy blue gown and holding my diploma, I searched for my parents in the crowd. They waved and smiled, but the first thing my mom said after we left the school grounds wasn't "congratulations." It was, "Chloe has a big competition tomorrow. Don't forget to set aside time to take her photos." The day I received my acceptance letter for a full-ride scholarship to college, the house was silent, with no cheers, because they were busy taking Chloe to a dance competition in California. I opened that letter alone, in silence, while my mom's Facebook page overflowed with photos of Chloe holding a golden trophy, showered in praise. My mother, Karen, gradually turned into a textbook stage mom. Her life no longer revolved around family or herself, but around the spotlight, the new ballet shoes, the summer art camps in New York or San Francisco. She lived through Chloe's achievements, each of her victories becoming my mother's victories. She managed Chloe's practice schedule, performance calendar, even her diet down to the last gram. My father, Robert, was always the quieter one, rarely objecting. He usually stood in the background, driving Chloe to and from rehearsals, writing checks for her dance tuition, and sometimes forcing a weak smile whenever I asked, "Dad, what about me?" I slowly learned how to stay silent, like an outsider in my own home. Every milestone of mine, from a small article published in the school magazine to my college acceptance letter, was overshadowed by photos of Chloe twirling in her white costume on stage. Sometimes, I wondered if my parents even remembered they had 2 daughters, or if in their eyes, I was just the shadow standing backstage, clapping for the star role named Chloe. In my memories, my maternal grandparents were the only ones who truly saw me not as Chloe's sister, but as myself, Emily. When I was 16, before they passed away, they left me a college fund. They always believed I had the potential to go far and deserved the support to pursue my own path. According to the family lawyer, the fund was enough to cover at least 4 years of tuition, an invaluable gift I cherished as a promise for my future. I used to dream of holding that check to pay my dorm deposit, to buy my first textbooks, to never have to worry about tuition again. But all of that vanished after what my mother called the house fire incident. When I was 17, on a winter evening, the kitchen filled with smoke from faulty wiring. The fire was quickly put out, leaving only a small section of the kitchen wall damaged. But a few months later, my mother announced that the entire college fund had been withdrawn to repair and upgrade the electrical and plumbing systems to keep the family safe. I remember that day vividly. She sat in the living room, her voice firm, while my father just nodded silently. I was stunned, feeling like the foundation of my entire future had been ripped away. I didn't dare protest, only accepted it with the naive belief that it was for the good of the family. But years later, in my sophomore year of college, I stumbled upon a stack of receipts in my mother's drawer. Printed clearly at the top, summer program at the New York Ballet Academy, Chloe Carter. The total amount was almost identical to what had once been mine. My hands shook, my chest tightened. The so-called house fire incident had been nothing but an excuse. My college fund had been used to send Chloe under the bright lights of a stage in another city. In that moment, whatever little trust I still had left in my parents shattered completely. To continue my education, I had no choice but to push myself to the limit with part-time jobs. During the day, I sat through demanding finance classes, and at night I worked behind the cashier counter of a convenience store. On weekends, I waited tables at a small cafe near campus. I lived on cheap coffee and long nights spent typing essays while my eyes burned with exhaustion. Sometimes, when I looked at friends whose parents provided for them without worry, I asked myself, why was I the one carrying this weight when the money was supposed to be mine in the first place? The scar wasn't just financial. It was etched into my mind that, on my parents' scale, Chloe's dreams always outweighed my future. The lie about doing it for the family turned out to be nothing more than a veil covering their blatant favoritism. From that day on, a distance grew between us that could never be bridged. Not a distance of geography, but of trust, a crack I knew would never heal. I met Daniel in my sophomore year, on a crisp autumn morning in the campus library. I was huddled over a cheap cup of coffee, my eyes heavy after a late-night shift at the convenience store. On the table in front of me was a stack of thick finance textbooks, pressing down on shoulders already too burdened. Daniel sat at the opposite table, gave me a small smile, and asked softly, "Do you need a study partner? I'm drowning in this material too." At first, I thought he was just another kind face among hundreds of students. But from that day on, Daniel slowly became the closest companion in my life. What surprised me most about Daniel was his patience. He wasn't just smart, he had a quiet attentiveness. From the very beginning, he noticed how many hours I worked and how rarely I joined in campus social activities. One evening, when we went out to dinner with a group of friends, someone casually asked me, "Are you going home to visit your family this summer?" I gave a faint smile, while Daniel quietly caught the flicker of sadness in my eyes as I replied, "Probably not. I need to stay and keep working." He didn't press me then, but the next day he handed me a sandwich and said, "I don't know what you're going through, but I hope at least today you can enjoy a good meal." I can't even say when that friendship blossomed into love. We studied together in the library, walked back to the dorms late at night when the streets were nearly empty. Daniel never made me feel like I had to strain for attention, the way I had at home, where I worked twice as hard just to be recognized half as much. He looked at me as though I deserved care, without achievements, without titles. I still remember the first time Daniel brought me to visit his family in Seattle. It was just a small birthday party for his youngest sister, a homemade cake that tilted slightly to one side, a few balloons dangling in the living room. But the way his parents joyfully prepared, the way everyone laughed together at the clumsy little details, left me overwhelmed. I had never felt that in my own family. At the Carter house, every event revolved around Chloe and the spotlight. At Daniel's home, even the simplest everyday moments were cherished as something special. I will never forget the look in his mother's eyes. She hugged me the very first time we met and said, "Welcome to the family." I forced a smile, unaccustomed to such unconditional warmth. But inside, it felt as if an emptiness I had carried for so long had finally been filled. I was both happy and heartbroken. Happy because I had finally found a place where I belonged, and heartbroken because I realized my own parents had never given me that. Daniel saw this contrast clearly. He witnessed how every time I got a message from my mother, her words revolved only around Chloe's rehearsal schedule, as if anything I said was just an interruption. He noticed the way I shredded tissues in my hand when my mom proudly showed off Chloe's dance videos but never bothered to ask how I had done on my exams. One evening, as I sat silently by the window, Daniel placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "You know, you don't have to wait for them to change. Build your own real family, with people who truly value you." Those words carved themselves into me. They were both comfort and a reminder that I couldn't keep chasing after love that would never come. From then on, I began to see life differently. I still worked hard, still studied just as much, but in my heart, I carried a new belief. That a brighter future was possible, not one dependent on my parents' approval, but one I could build with my own hands, with Daniel by my side. I remember one time when the university hosted a small exhibition for students. I was chosen to present my research on the financial markets. That day, I was incredibly nervous, my hands trembling as I adjusted the final slide. But when I stepped onto the stage and looked down, I saw Daniel and his parents sitting in the front row, clapping and cheering for me. That feeling, this simple but complete act of being present, gave me strength. I delivered my presentation with confidence, and when the audience rose to applaud, I knew I had done it. In that moment, I was no longer the forgotten girl standing in Chloe's shadow. I was myself, Emily, and someone truly saw me. After that day, I realized even more deeply that I didn't need a perfect family to feel loved. I needed a real family, a home where presence mattered more than medals or articles. And I knew that with Daniel, I was slowly building exactly that. It was the contrast between these two worlds: on one side, the Carters with their relentless favoritism, and on the other, Daniel's family with their unconditional love, that helped me recognize my own worth. Though old wounds still remained, Daniel showed me that I was not anyone's shadow and that there was another path, a path of my own. From then on, I began the journey of choosing a new family, not through blood, but through love and genuine respect. I had thought I was used to being forgotten, that years of growing up in Chloe's shadow had toughened me enough that comparisons no longer stung. But one evening, while sitting on the small sofa in our apartment with Daniel, I happened to scroll past one of Chloe's Instagram stories. She was wearing a sparkling dance costume, spinning beneath the stage lights, with a bold caption, "Some people sit at desks, others stand on stage and shine." Right below it, I saw the little red heart my mother had tapped. I froze. Not because of the mockery, I was used to that, but because of the brazen publicness of it. For years, my parents' favoritism had been an unspoken thing everyone could sense but rarely put on display. This time, my mother didn't just silently take Chloe's side, she openly endorsed it with a single tap that carried the weight of a lifetime of comparison. The story spread quickly. Relatives, old classmates, even coworkers tagged me and left half jokes, half mean comments. "Emily, maybe you should try taking dance lessons?" Or, "Every family has its star, right?" I read each line and felt like I had been turned into a joke in front of an audience. Daniel sat beside me, saw my face go pale, and took my phone, asking, "Do you want me to say something?" "I can't stand how they treat you." I shook my head. For so many years, I had wasted energy seeking recognition from my birth parents and always ended up disappointed. I knew that replying now would be like pouring fuel on the fire, making me look weak and defensive. Instead, I sat in silence, felt the heaviness in my chest, and slowly exhaled. That night, I tossed and turned for a long time. Memories kept surfacing. The certificate left forgotten on the dining table, graduation day when no one remembered me, the college fund withdrawn, and now the public mocking story shared for all to see. Each one felt like a drop of water, and that story was the final drop that made the glass overflow. I realized a bitter but liberating truth: I would never be acknowledged in their eyes. No matter how hard I tried, no matter what career I built, in my parents' view, I would always be the second child, while Chloe remained the center. But instead of falling into the same sorrow as before, I felt a strange calm. I looked at Daniel, at the life we were building with our own two hands, and I suddenly understood that I no longer needed their recognition. I did not need my mother to tap a heart on my achievements, nor my father to force a smile when I talked about a new project. What I needed was genuine warmth, sincere presence, and I already had that from Daniel, from his family, and from friends who valued me for who I was. The next morning, when I opened my phone, dozens of tagged messages and mocking comments awaited. I skimmed them, but they no longer stung the way they had the night before. Instead, a clear decision formed in my heart. I would stop chasing approval from a family that chose to cast me aside. I would stop proving my worth to people who never truly wanted to see it. I would put that energy into building my own family, a family where love is not measured by achievements, and where presence matters more than the stage lights. That was the moment I felt myself begin to taste freedom. The mocking story, instead of trapping me in the same old spiral, became a door opening onto a new path. I knew that path would lead to the most important day of my life, the day I would marry Daniel, but this time I would no longer expect my parents to show up. I would leave them with Chloe's stage, and I would walk toward my own happiness. When Daniel and I officially decided to get married, I spent a long time thinking about how to tell my family. Part of me still longed for one last chance, one final test to see if my parents could finally look at me as the center of something. I knew that if I simply announced, "I'm getting married," they would find a way to make the event seem secondary to Chloe's rehearsal schedule. So I chose a different approach, a message that was at once an invitation and a final measure of the love they could offer me. That evening, I opened the Carter family group chat on my phone. My fingers trembled, but I typed each word clearly. On October 14th, I have a very important event. I hope everyone can be there. I read it over and over, my heart pounding. It was a message that revealed nothing specific, meant to see whether they would show concern, ask questions, or simply assume that any event of mine was less important than Chloe's. When I hit send, I felt like I had thrown a stone into a still pond, waiting to see how the ripples would spread. A few minutes later, my phone lit up. It was my mother, Karen. She replied briefly, without hesitation. That night is Chloe's biggest solo performance before she auditions for the dance company. The whole family will be there. No further questions, not a moment of curiosity about what event I was referring to. Only a firm assertion: Chloe is more important. I waited a little longer, hoping my father would message, hoping he would ask me, "What is the important event, Emily?" But nothing. The group chat stayed quiet except for my mother's message. My father remained silent as always, and that silence hurt more than any outright rejection. Chloe sent a smiling face emoji with the line, "So glad the whole family will support me that night," as if my message had merely been a backdrop for her to boast. I set my phone down on the table, feeling empty. Daniel sat beside me, saw my face go pale, and asked, "What did they say?" I showed him the screen. He read it, frowned, shook his head, then put his arm around me. "I'm sorry. I know you hoped they would ask. But at least now you have a clear answer." I nodded slightly, tears spilling over that I could not hold back. This was the final confirmation of what I had always known in my heart. In my parents' eyes, I was only a shadow. That night, I lay staring at the ceiling for a long time. I remembered all the times I had sent messages about my academic achievements, only to get back a half-hearted thumbs-up emoji. I remembered my 20th birthday, when the whole family was away taking Chloe to a performance in another state, while I sat eating a small cake Daniel had bought for me. And now, even my wedding, the day that was supposed to be the most sacred of my life, wasn't important enough for them to even ask about. All those fragments strung together into a complete picture. My family had never truly seen me. I didn't respond to my mother's message. I didn't say another word in the group chat. I let them believe I would remain silent, just as I had so many times before. But inside, I had already made a decision. I would hold my wedding on my own terms, with people who truly wanted to be there for me, not because they felt obligated. I would step into a new life without needing their recognition. The next day, I received a few more private messages from my mother. She sent Chloe's performance schedule with a reminder. Make sure you don't overlap with that day. The whole family needs to be there to cheer her on. I read it and gave a faint smile. I said nothing about the wedding, nor did I protest. I let them believe that my important event was nothing more than a company meeting, a seminar, or some other forgettable detail in their eyes. I chose silence because this time silence was no longer surrender, it was a way of preserving my strength for myself. In the weeks that followed, as Daniel and I threw ourselves into preparing for the wedding, my family all but disappeared from the picture. No questions, no mentions, not a single word of concern. And strangely, I felt relieved. Without them, we picked the flowers ourselves, arranged the tables ourselves, made the guest list ourselves. I realized that building the most important day of my life without their interference brought me a freedom I had never known before. That text message I had sent, which once carried a faint trace of hope, ended up becoming a milestone of liberation. It was like a mirror reflecting the truth, stripping away any illusions I still held. If before I had been caught in the cycle of desperately wanting my parents' recognition, from that moment on, I knew I would never chase it again. I would let them continue living in Chloe's world, while I stepped into a new chapter, a chapter no longer shrouded in the darkness of favoritism, but filled with the light of people who had chosen to stand by me. The wedding day arrived, and it was as if Santa Barbara itself put on its purest attire. The sky was pale blue, with a few soft clouds drifting lazily in the distance, and the sea breeze carried the gentle scent of salt mixed with lavender from the garden. Our wedding wasn't held in a grand cathedral or a lavish hotel, but in the seaside garden of Daniel's aunt. It was a garden overlooking the ocean, with strings of lights hung along the paths, twinkling like a galaxy as the sun slowly dipped. In that setting, I felt an unusual stillness in my heart, as if the wounds had never existed, as if the years of being overlooked had never been. The guest list was small, only those who truly mattered. Close friends from college, a few colleagues I considered family, relatives from Daniel's side who always welcomed me warmly, and of course his family people who had not hesitated to open their arms to me from the very beginning. The crowd was not large, but every face shone with sincerity. I looked around and did not see my parents, nor Chloe. Strangely, that absence no longer made my throat tighten as it once did. Instead, I felt another circle enveloping me. A circle of people who chose to be present, not out of obligation, but out of love. When I walked down the aisle, I did not go with my father as tradition dictates. The hand that held mine that day belonged to my grandfather, George, 70 years old but with a steady, resolute gaze. When he placed his warm hand on mine, I heard him whisper, "My girl, I am so proud of you. Let me do this for you in place of your father." I choked up and tears welled in my eyes. He did not need many words. That single sentence was enough to erase decades of yearning for recognition. He also gave me a silver necklace set with a shimmering blue stone. "This was your grandmother's keepsake. She wanted you to have it, and today I believe she is watching from above, smiling at your happiness." I touched the necklace and felt as if I were connected to the grandmother who once held me as a child, the only person in the family who had ever said, "Emily, you deserve to be loved." As the music began, I walked slowly, my eyes fixed ahead where Daniel waited. He wore a navy suit, his face radiant but his eyes showing the emotion of seeing me. I knew that in that moment we both thought back over the road we had traveled, the long nights I worked until exhaustion, the tears shed when my family abandoned me, and the times Daniel patiently sat beside me and listened. All of it had led us to this moment. The ceremony was simple, without a grand stage or a symphony orchestra. There were only the distant sounds of waves, the breeze gently stirring the strings of lights, and the soft murmur of familiar voices. When the officiant asked, "Do you take Daniel to be your husband, to share in joy and sorrow, in light and darkness?" I looked into his eyes and answered with a steady voice, "Yes, I do." In that instant, I felt as if the cracks in my heart were being mended. Not because my parents had returned to apologize, but because I realized I no longer needed that to feel whole. I had my own family now, a family I had chosen, one that measured love not by achievements but by presence and sincerity. After exchanging rings, Daniel squeezed my hand tightly, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "We did it, Em." I smiled through my tears. I knew I had just stepped through a new door, leaving behind years of hopeless waiting. The reception unfolded in a warm and intimate atmosphere. Long wooden tables were draped with white cloths, wildflowers arranged in simple glass jars that somehow felt elegant. My friends raised their glasses, reminiscing about college days, colleagues offered their blessings with playful jokes, and Daniel's family embraced me as if I had always been one of them. I laughed so much my cheeks hurt, and for the first time in my life, I felt I truly belonged somewhere. As night fell, the strings of lights shimmered like stars, illuminating every face. I sat down, looked around, and let myself sink into the moment. This wedding wasn't lavish or loud, but it overflowed with love and healing. And when Daniel took my hand as we stepped out into the garden to breathe in the sea breeze, I whispered to myself, "I found my real family." That day, I understood something important. Love doesn't have to come from where we were born, but from where we are valued. And in the soft glow of Santa Barbara, I knew that at last, I had the happiness I deserved. After the wedding, I thought everything would settle. Daniel and I left for our honeymoon in Carmel by the Sea, a quiet coastal town in California. We rented a small cottage, spent mornings walking on soft sand, afternoons sipping wine at little roadside cafes, and nights curled up by the fireplace listening to the waves. I wanted to gift myself these days without burdens, without the shadow of family. But just a few days later, the aftershocks of the wedding began to spread in ways I hadn't anticipated. One of Daniel's aunts, after attending the wedding, posted a photo of Daniel and me holding hands beneath a canopy of pure white bougainvillea. Beneath it, she wrote a short caption. "Some people choose different priorities." Just 7 words, but they struck like a spark on dry wood. Friends, relatives, even old neighbors from Portland began resharing it, adding their own questions. Why weren't the bride's parents at their daughter's wedding? What happened to the Carter family? In less than a day, the photo had been shared hundreds of times, with comments pouring in. Some expressed sympathy for me, saying nothing was more painful than parents being absent on such a sacred day. Others reacted with outrage. If it were my daughter, no matter how busy I was, I would never miss it. The talk spread quickly, like rising waves, pulling in even those who had known my family back in Portland. My father, Robert, chose silence. He didn't comment, didn't explain, didn't even message me. But my mother was different. She began calling nonstop, flooding me with messages. "What are you doing, Emily? You've turned the whole family into a joke. People think I abandoned my daughter on her wedding day." In the voicemail she left, her voice trembled, equal parts anger and panic. "You've ruined the family's image." Chloe didn't stay silent either. She sent me long messages, accusing me of deliberately choosing the same date as her performance, claiming I had secretly planned the wedding just to humiliate the family. In one message, Chloe wrote, "You're so petty. A wedding is supposed to be a day of happiness, but you turned it into a tool for revenge. I will never forgive you." I read her words, then set my phone down without replying. Daniel noticed me holding my phone all evening, my face tense. He gently said, "We're on our honeymoon. You don't have to let them intrude on this space anymore. Just turn it off." He placed his hand over mine, his gaze firm yet tender, and I listened. I turned the phone off, tucked it into the wooden drawer of the cottage, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I let them spin in their anger and chaos while I chose peace. What I didn't know at the time was that the post hadn't stopped at a few relatives' comments. It had spread through the entire Portland community, the place where I had grown up. Old neighbors who had once watched my parents drive Chloe back and forth to dance practice began asking public questions. A former classmate wrote, "I remember Emily in high school winning a major scholarship, but her parents never mentioned it. Now I understand." One neighbor commented, "The whole neighborhood always knew Karen lived only for Chloe's dance achievements. Now the truth is out." Those words became testimonies, echoing and amplifying until the matter could no longer be hidden. My family became the subject of gossip not because Chloe was shining, but because they had chosen to be absent on their eldest daughter's wedding day. In Portland, where everyone knew one another, it was nothing short of a public scandal. And I, during those days, was simply walking along the beach in Carmel with Daniel, hand in hand, leaving the storm behind me. I had no idea that each photo, each line of text was cutting into my parents' reputation, that every acquaintance was adding their voice to a growing tide of public opinion. All I knew in those moments was peace. I sat on the sand, the wind tossing my hair, Daniel holding me close, and I thought, at last, I had chosen right. Only when we returned from the honeymoon and I turned my phone back on did I realize how big the storm had grown. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages, an inbox overflowing. I skimmed a few, saw my mother still blaming me, Chloe still furious. But among them were congratulations from old friends, from people who had quietly witnessed how I had been overlooked. They said I had finally stepped out of the shadow, that I deserved the happiness I had now. And I knew that even if my family was collapsing under anger and shame, I had found peace for myself. News of my wedding, along with the wave of public opinion sparked by my aunt's post, didn't stop at whispers in the community. It crashed directly into the Carter household like a sudden storm. The first one who couldn't endure it was my grandfather, George. He was the one who had walked me down the aisle, the one who had silently watched his son and daughter-in-law favor Chloe for years. But this time, with the entire neighborhood talking, with the family's honor turning into a public joke, he could no longer stay silent. One morning, my grandfather went straight to my parents' house in Portland. I wasn't there that day, but later I was told the entire house seemed to shake with his voice. He stood in the middle of the living room, leaning on his cane, pointing directly at my father. "Robert, you are a failure as a father. You let your wife and younger daughter manipulate you, and you abandoned your eldest child on her wedding day. Not only that, you took away her trust, took away her opportunities for years. Don't you feel ashamed?" My father sat silently on the couch, his head bowed, unable to speak a word. My mother, Karen, as always, tried to fight back. She hurried to explain, her voice flustered. "Dad, I didn't mean to. That was Chloe's biggest solo performance, her whole career depended on it. Emily, she never said it was a wedding. How were we supposed to know?" But my grandfather cut her off, his voice sharp as steel. No father, no mother, would fail to ask more questions when their child says they have an important event. That excuse only proves you never considered Emily important. And what's the result now? The entire city of Portland is laughing at this family. His words were like a blade cutting through the silence that had stood for years. My father could no longer sit still. He jumped up and shouted at my mother. "Karen, he's right. All these years I've let you run things, let you turn this family into Chloe's stage. I stayed silent because I thought it would keep the peace, but that silence cost me my eldest daughter. I can't stand it anymore." It was the first time my father publicly stood against my mother, and it was also the moment he mentioned divorce. He said directly, in front of my grandfather, that if the favoritism and selfishness continued to haunt this household, he would leave. Meanwhile, the event my family had valued above all else, Chloe's performance, did not unfold as expected. That night, she stepped onto the stage under dazzling lights, the auditorium packed with eager spectators, including my parents who sat waiting with anticipation. But, in the middle of her crucial solo, Chloe slipped and lost her rhythm. The fall ruined the entire piece, and murmurs of disappointment rippled through the audience. Someone in the hall captured the moment and uploaded it online with a biting caption, "Skipped their daughter's wedding to watch this." It wasn't long before the video became the subject of mockery. People began comparing Chloe's onstage failure to Karen and Robert's failure as parents. Sarcastic comments spread quickly. "That's what happens when you put your priorities in the wrong place." If they had given their eldest daughter half the attention they gave this performance, things might have been different. Chloe, who had always been accustomed to the spotlight, now faced public ridicule for the first time. She grew furious, smashing her phone after reading the comments. But the more she lashed out, the more her image became fuel for gossip. The weight of public pressure began to crush my family. Neighbors who once admired the so-called perfect family now turned away, looking at them with pity and judgment. My father's colleagues bluntly asked, "Did you really skip your daughter's wedding?" When my mother went to the market, she overheard whispers, "Stage mom, living only through her youngest child." Even within the church community she had been part of for years, people began to keep their distance. The reputation she had so carefully built around Chloe's achievements collapsed like a sandcastle. My father fell into crisis. For the first time, he faced the raw truth. He had let everything slip beyond his control. He realized that his silence and constant compromise had driven me away from the family, and now public opinion would not spare him either. My grandfather George didn't soften his words. Each time they met, he reminded him, "If you don't change, you'll lose both daughters. One already keeps her distance, and the other is being crushed under pressure." Inside that house, the atmosphere grew unbearably heavy. My mother tried to cling on, insisting that people misunderstood, that given time the gossip would fade. But my father no longer believed her excuses. He began talking about marriage counseling, even discussing how assets would be divided if divorce came. Chloe shut herself in her room, crying one moment and raging the next, turning the blame back on me, accusing me of deliberately destroying her life. But what they refused to admit is that their choices unleashed all these consequences. They abandoned me on my wedding day to gamble on a performance, and in the end both became stains on the family's reputation in the eyes of the community. This was not only the price paid by my parents or by Chloe, but a shock to the entire Carter family, a family that once prided itself on a perfect image, now shattered under society's mocking gaze. A few weeks after we returned from the honeymoon, the phone rang nonstop. This time it wasn't only my mother's angry calls, but my father's familiar hoarse voice as well. He called in a different tone, no longer rigid or cold as before. "Emily, I want to see you. Just the two of us. At that little diner you used to like, remember?" I hesitated, but finally agreed. The diner sat on a quiet street in the suburbs of Portland. It was the place my father used to take me for hamburgers when I was in 6th grade, one of the rare times I felt he paid attention to me alone. When I walked in, he was already there, twirling his coffee cup, his gaze heavy with weight. He looked at me, unable to hide his regret. "I'm sorry, I stayed silent for too long. I let your mother and Chloe manipulate everything. I thought that if I didn't make waves, the family would stay peaceful. But my silence hurt you more than anything." I sat quietly and listened to every word. He took a long breath and continued. "I also want to talk to you about the college fund. I know about it. I was wrong to let your mother withdraw the money. I promise I will repay you little by little, and I have signed up for therapy. I want to fix things before I lose you completely." But I looked at him and saw a sincerity in his eyes that had rarely shown before. I nodded slightly, but I didn't rush to forgive. "Dad, I appreciate what you said today. But you know, those years left scars. I can't erase them with just a promise. If you truly want to change, then show me through your actions. I'll wait, but not like a child hoping anymore. I'll wait as an adult, knowing I have the right to walk away if I see the same silence again." My father nodded, his shoulders sinking as if a weight had been lifted. A few days later, my mother texted asking to meet. I agreed, this time at a cafe downtown. When I walked in, she was already there, heavily made up but with a gaunt face, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights. The moment she saw me, she burst into tears. "Emily, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was blind. I just wanted my youngest daughter to have a future, and I didn't realize I was abandoning you. But I never meant to hate you." I sat down, neither crying nor trembling. I took out a sheet of paper I had prepared. On it, I had listed every time she was absent in my life: the day I won the speech contest, the day I received my scholarship, my 18th birthday, my college graduation. I read each event aloud, my voice steady, without accusation, just the truth. My mother collapsed onto the table, sobbing. "I remember. I was wrong. I can't turn back time. But I want you to forgive me, to give me a chance." I set the paper down and looked straight into her eyes. "Mom, apologies don't erase the years. I don't need more promises. I need action. I need to see you truly change, not just say you will." She went silent, her tears smudging her mascara. I stood up, leaving her in her torment. For the first time, I walked away from a meeting with my mother without feeling powerless. The final conversation was with Chloe. She reached out herself, texting, "We need to talk." I agreed, and we met at a park near our old house. Chloe arrived with anger on her face, dressed fashionably but with red, swollen eyes. As soon as she sat down, she snapped. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You chose the exact day of my performance, you hid the wedding from the family, and now everyone is mocking us online. You wanted to humiliate me, didn't you?" I looked at her and answered calmly. "No, Chloe. I didn't do it on purpose. I just didn't have the strength to spell it out anymore, because I knew if I did, the family would still choose you. I wanted to see if anyone cared enough to ask me again. But no one did. That's not my fault, that was everyone's choice." Chloe slammed her hand on the stone bench, her voice breaking. "You made me a laughingstock. My video went viral, and people are mocking me everywhere. I hate you." I sighed, then said the words I had held back for years. "You love the stage, Chloe. You love all eyes on you. But remember, when the lights shine, they also expose every flaw. This is the consequence of the stage you chose." She froze, unable to respond, then stood up and walked away. I watched her back as she left, realizing that whatever fragile bond of sisterhood remained between us had now finally broken. The 3 conversations with my father, my mother, and my sister were like 3 mirrors reflecting my past. A father who, for the first time, admitted his mistakes. A mother who could only cry and make promises. A sister still blinded by her own spotlight. I walked away from them all, no longer feeling the need to prove myself. I had said everything, I had heard everything. The rest was no longer mine to carry. It belonged to them, and to the choices they would have to live with. After all the talks, after all the days of turmoil, Daniel and I made a clear decision: we would leave Portland and begin a new life in Seattle. It was not just a change of geography, but a shift in my state of mind, a way to escape the shadows, the memories that clung to me like invisible chains. Seattle welcomed us with its delicate rain, the aroma of coffee drifting through its streets, and a rhythm of life both vibrant and gentle enough to make me believe I could start over. I focused on my work in finance, while Daniel pursued his career in architecture. Together we laid each brick of a new home, a home that needed no stage lights, only genuine presence. What surprised me was that my father kept his word. He began sending me small amounts of money, regularly, with a short note each time. "Returning your fund, little by little." At first I was surprised, then moved. I didn't need that money to survive. I had long since learned to provide for myself, but each transfer felt like a slow but genuine piece of proof that he was trying to make amends. He also called me, not saying much, only sharing that he was in therapy, that he was beginning to understand how his silence had left such lasting damage. Once, he said haltingly, "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, I just hope you see that I'm trying." For the first time in many years, I believed he truly wanted to change. My mother was different. She kept sending long, rambling messages filled with apologies, sometimes attaching old photos to remind me that she still loved me. But I had changed. I was no longer so easily softened by tears. I only responded when I saw her take concrete actions, like when she mentioned she had skipped one of Chloe's performances to attend a community meeting, or when she told me she was volunteering to teach dance to underprivileged children instead of pouring everything into her youngest daughter. I knew change would be a long journey, and I no longer wanted to give away my trust too quickly. I chose patience, but also distance, to protect myself. As for Chloe, she never reached out again. I heard that her failed performance had shaken her career, and the public pressure had forced her to step back for a while. I felt neither satisfaction nor sorrow. Only the sense that, sooner or later, everything falls back into its rightful place. The stage lights fade quickly, but the truth never disappears. As I sit down to write these words, I realize that my journey is not just a private story. It is a reminder to anyone who has ever felt forgotten in their own family. Family does not always mean love. Blood does not guarantee respect. And sometimes, healing is not about patching cracks that run too deep, but about letting go, about having the courage to step away and build a new circle, one made of people who choose to be present. Now, each morning in Seattle, as I brew coffee and watch Daniel busy with his sketches, I feel peace in my heart. I no longer crave my mother's nod, nor do I wait for my father's praise. I have found recognition in the life I am living. My colleagues who respect me for my ability, Daniel's family who always welcomes me with warmth, they have all shown me that family is not just the place we are born into, but the place we are chosen to remain. One afternoon, I posted a wedding photo on my personal page, Daniel and me laughing brightly beneath the white archway in Santa Barbara. Beneath it, I wrote a short line. I built something of my own, with people who chose to show up. No explanation, no mention of the past. Just a small declaration, quiet but resolute, that I had moved beyond the days of being forgotten, and that now I was fully living in the present. And perhaps, that is the greatest lesson I want to share with anyone listening. You don't need to chase recognition from those who always turn their backs on you. Have the courage to leave, the strength to build. Because in the end, freedom and true love will only come from those who value your presence, not because you are perfect, but simply because you are you.